certified manager, is director of business analytics, actually director of business, and now I should read what I wrote, director of business analysis quality for Fidelity Investments. She's a graduate of Barry University. She later earned her MA in management and leadership from Webster University. Her career spans working for Siemens, working for United Space Alliance, as well as for Lockheed Martin. Many of you who know her know that she's also a certified Lean Six Sigma Black Belt and is actually assisting one of our chapters right now, piloting a self-study Six Sigma program. She has experience in both transactional and operational process improvement and over 10 years of management experience. Melinda's skills include training and facilitation, technical writing, document management, and requirements definition. Other specialties are communications, team building, mentoring, DMAIC, 5S, 6S, and Lean. In 2012, after a long NMA career in chapters at the Kennedy Space Center, Melinda served as NMA's national chairman of the board. She has also served on the board of regents for the Institute of Certified Professional Managers, and she did that over 8 years, from 2006 to 2014. She's a member of ASQ, Toastmasters International, the American Red Cross, and FIRST Robotics. She and her husband, Dennis, currently live in Charlotte, North Carolina. So, Melinda, I'm going to turn this over to you, and you're in charge for the next 57 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. Hopefully everyone can hear me. And now, Steve, I'm going to have to cut something out because of that lengthy introduction. So glossophobia, that is the term for fear of public speaking, glossophobia. And, you know, recently, and you may have heard this, that fear of public speaking is human beings' number one fear. The whole fear of speaking in front of other people. So much so that dying is even further down the list. Jerry Seinfeld made a joke about this. He says, so if people are more afraid of public speaking than they are of dying, then that means they'd rather die than do the eulogy at a funeral. Well, technically, I did some more research when I was preparing this, and public speaking is no longer the number one fear. It's actually number 5 now. But guess what? It's still higher on the list, or lower on the list, whichever way you want to look at it, than dying. So I'll leave that thought with you. All right. So our agenda for today. We're going to talk a little bit about communication, because that's what we're doing when we're speaking. Then we're going to talk about the 3 P's of effective presentations. That's prepare, practice, and present. Easy for me to say, right? So some communication facts. There's the rule of 3. As human beings, we can remember 3 things. So when you're preparing your presentation, don't try to give people too much information. Don't just glom a whole bunch of stuff out there. You need to group it into groups of 3s. And you'll see that that's what I've done today. I've got groups of 3s. Because here's why. As humans, when we hear things, we forget 40% or retain 60% of it within 30 minutes. By the end of the day, we've forgotten a whole 60%. And after a week, we've lost pretty much all of it, right? So we need to do something to help our listeners retain the information we're trying to impart to them. One way to do that is to use pictures or graphs, because it's more experiential. So we get to how people communicate. So words, graphs, things like that are much more abstract. It goes straight down the list to the more concrete things, which is simulation and direct experience. These things correlate directly to how people learn. Some people are auditory. They can hear things and they can learn it. Some people are tactile. They have to actually feel, touch, do. And then there's the experiential people. Those people who really have to experience it. I'm one of the tactile types. So if I can hold something in my hand, like a piece of paper, so I need a handout. All of you hopefully got a handout because I did provide that. If I can hold it in my hand, if I can take notes, if I can read it myself, so some people are very visual as well, that's part of the tactile, then you'll learn. And communication actually sinks in. Some people really have to experience it, and as we'll get into, sometimes maybe what you need to do is provide them a way in your presentation to experience, and we'll get into some of that. So like I said, I gave you some handouts. Now you can take notes on those handouts, you can read along with me, you can throw them in the garbage, you can keep them for reference, whatever, it doesn't matter. But I know some people want that and need that. I'm one of those types, so because I know that some people are that way, you've got handouts. How we take in information. We really, when we're preparing a presentation, we really concern ourselves with the words. And the words are important, but not as important as other aspects. So the words that we pick are only 7% of the communication process. Another piece of it is our tone, our vocal variety, the tone we use when we present it. That's 38%. So does the tone match the message that you're giving? Are you giving bad news? And are you happy and excited about it? That means that causes people conflict. And likewise, body language, visual, the things we see is 55%. So you can see that 3% of communication is either our tone or what we see. So if our body language and our tone of voice doesn't match the words that we're saying, guess what people are going to believe? They're going to believe your body language and your tone of voice. So this is really important, especially if you're trying to convince somebody of something. So the first P in the 3 Ps of effective presentations is prepare. So the first thing we have to know is we have to understand, why are we giving this presentation? What is our purpose behind this presentation? Do we want to inform people? Do we want to sell something? Do we want to convince somebody to go create, give us some money so we can do a project or implement some kind of a change? Do we want to motivate people to do something? What is it that what is the purpose behind our presentation? If you don't have a purpose, then why are you even doing a presentation? If you don't know what your purpose is, why are you doing a presentation? You need to understand, what is your purpose first. Then the second part of prepare is understanding your audience. You have to know your audience. So the things you see here on the screen, this is what you want to convey to your audience during your speech. You want them to understand that you're not going to waste their time. So if this is an audience who knows some of the background, who understands where this project started or whatever problem it is that you're presenting to them, then you don't need to go into that background, because why would you do that? They already know it. They understand it. Let's just go on from here. If they've been part of this project team, don't bother them with history. That's wasting their time. Are they familiar with the topic? If they are, then it's okay to use jargon. But if they're not familiar with the topic, don't use the jargon, or if you have to, then you need to explain what it means every time you use it, not just the first time. We're going to talk about organization in just a little bit, but you need to be organized as well. So when you're standing in front of the group, you don't need to be flipping through papers looking for something like you've lost your place. You want to make sure that you present yourself well as if you are organized. And what this is going to do is this is going to convey to your audience, first off, that you really do know your subject. And that's the next one on the list there, is knowing your subject. You really need to know your subject. We are going to talk about research in a few minutes, but it's okay to have notes. Everybody needs notes. I have notes, but you need to know your subject, and you need to have that confidence and convey that confidence that you know what you're talking about to your audience. Your audience needs to understand what is the point you're trying to get across. So back to number one, what's my purpose? Why am I here? Here's what I'm trying to get across. And then your audience needs to know when you're done. It's very important. So one of the things to help you know your subject is to really do a lot of research. You really need to research your subject. Whenever I'm trying to prepare for a speech, I always prepare by researching it as if I'm going to teach it. And then think about myself whenever I'm writing it. Okay, do I have the answers to all my questions? I may not present all of that information, but do I have the answers to all my questions? What kind of questions might I ask if somebody were presenting this to me? So you have to prepare for questions. If you don't prepare for questions, you're going to just fall off the stage or the podium at the end, because you won't be able to answer the questions, or you may not be able to answer the questions. And one of the things to do, because we will talk about practicing, you need to practice, is think about or practice in front of people you know, people you're comfortable with, and have them ask you questions, because they might be able to think of questions that you wouldn't be able to think of. And then prepare your presentation. So you want to select your resource material. Sometimes you're presenting your own material where you're going out, you're doing the research completely and preparing the information. Sometimes you're presenting something that somebody else prepared, but that doesn't mean that you don't have to research. Just because somebody else prepared the material doesn't mean that you don't have to go out, do the research, be sure you're able to talk to the subject. You also need to look at that material to make sure it's organized properly, especially if somebody else prepared it. So you organize your material by having an introduction. You tell them what you're going to tell them. Then the body of the speech or of the presentation, you tell them. And then in the conclusion, you tell them what you just told them. So it's tell them, tell them, tell them. If someone else prepared your material, review it, make sure that it's organized in this way. If it's not, reorganize it. Make it your own. And that leads me to the practice piece. And I can't stress this enough. You have to practice your presentation. You have to practice your presentation whenever for the specific presentation, but you need to practice, and that's part of prepare also. I can't tell you how many times, as Steve mentioned, I'm a member of Toastmasters, and I can't tell you how many times people have come into a Toastmasters meeting, because all Toastmasters meetings are open to guests. And we say, well, okay, what brought you to Toastmasters? You know, why are you here? We always ask people to introduce themselves and say why they've come. And I don't know how many times they say, well, I have to give a presentation next week at work. So I thought I'd come in and get some pointers. I'm sorry, that's way too late. Next week, and you're just coming to a meeting? Next week is wrong. You need to practice talking in front of people and get comfortable with it long before you ever have to do it. And I can't stress that enough. But even if you are comfortable talking in front of other people, then when it comes down to a specific presentation, you have to practice it, that presentation. And the reason for practicing both way long before a specific presentation and for the specific presentation is that it gives you confidence. You know, so you should look at trying to either join a Toastmasters group or some other group. There are lots of groups. There are lots of places that you can go, Dale Carnegie, even within your own NMA, and practice getting up in front of people and giving speeches. The one nice thing about Toastmasters, and this really is not an advertisement for Toastmasters, but the one nice thing about Toastmasters is that you get instant feedback on how well you did, on your presentation skills, on your presentation itself. You get instant feedback right then and there from an evaluator and usually from everybody in the meeting. It also identifies, when you practice, it identifies flaws or gaps or things that are awkward. You might, when you're writing it, think that this is fine, this works, but then when you're getting up and you're actually talking to something, it's awkward. So it will identify those things that are awkward. The next point, familiarity with material, is extremely important, especially if it's not your own material, if you didn't create it. You need to know that material like the back of your hand. You need to know coming up, what slide's coming up, what are the things that are coming up. You need to know all of that. As a matter of fact, in one of the classes that I teach on Six Sigma, I sometimes will be 3 slides ahead. I'll be talking and I know what's next and next and next, and I haven't gotten there yet. I mean, as far as the slides go, but I'll be 3 slides ahead. So then whenever I flip the slide, I go, oh yeah, okay, I just talked about that. I just talked about that. So that is really important. The next thing is practicing with your visual aids. So your visual aid might be a PowerPoint deck. Fine and good. But you might have other visual aids. You might be using a flip chart as opposed to a PowerPoint deck. So you need to be comfortable with using that flip chart, with pulling the paper off and sticking it up on the wall or turning it over, things like that. If you have some kind of a prop that you're going to be using, you want to get comfortable with using that prop. And then, of course, it helps you to anticipate questions. So again, see, a minute ago I said, practice in front of other people, practice in front of your family, practice in front of your kids, anybody, and anticipate what questions those people might ask. Have them ask you questions. Like I said, you might have practiced all you can yourself and thought of all of the things that people might ask you, but guess what? You might not be able to think of everything, and if you haven't anticipated, I mean, and it's going to happen anyway. Sometimes somebody's going to ask you a question that you don't have the answer to. And then the right answer for that, of course, is, I don't know, but I'll get back with you on that. Don't ever, ever, ever try to fool somebody into thinking you know it. If you don't know it, just admit you don't know, but you'll find out and get back with them. So it's okay to use your notes. So it's not necessary when you're practicing to memorize your speech or your presentation, especially if it's a long presentation. You're not ever going to be able to memorize it. And the kids in the speech contest, you know, they have a 6-minute speech and they've probably got them memorized, even though they don't sound like they have them memorized. But it's okay to use notes. It's always okay to use notes. Whether you use little tiny notes or if you, I'm going to go out of PowerPoint for just a second because I don't know how many of you know, I mean out of slideshow, but PowerPoint allows you notes. Can you see this? You can put notes in here and then you can print the notes. And that's what I do. But then I also write. I don't know how many of you can see here if you're looking at me, but you can see where I write myself notes in addition to any notes that I wrote on the PowerPoint presentation. So that's just something that if you don't know about in PowerPoint, I just wanted to show you that PowerPoint has that ability to put notes in there as you're making your presentation or after the fact. If you're doing somebody else's material, you need to practice it as well. You need to read it. You need to make sure that it is comfortable for you, that it's not awkward, and that it follows your personality. So if there's a word in there that you wouldn't ordinarily say, and maybe the people you're presenting to know, I would never say that word, change it. Change it to a word you would use. Make changes to it. Just because somebody else presented it doesn't mean that you have to deliver it verbatim. How many times have you been at a presentation and somebody's reading something and you think, is that the first time they've ever read that? They just read it like they were in the first grade. Practice the presentation. Give yourself confidence. Identify flaws or gaps. Terrible. You need to practice it and give the right emphasis in the right place in the right time whenever you're reading, especially when you're reading or presenting somebody else's material, because you need to make it your own. Your audience needs to think that you did it. Part of practice is knowing your venue or your medium. So if you're in a physical space, you need to go to that physical space. You need to go long before your presentation. If you can, the day before. You need to look at how the room is set up. Is the room set up the way you want it set up? Or if it's not, can you change it? And if you can't change it, is there somebody available to help you change it? And if you can't change it at all, it just isn't physically possible, then you need to figure out what you have to do to adapt your presentation to the setup. You don't want that surprise an hour, 30 minutes before you start your presentation. You want to know about what equipment's available. Do they have a computer? Do they have overhead projectors? Do they have big screen TVs? What is it that they have? Maybe they don't have any of that. Maybe you're going to have to use a flip chart. And if you're going to have to use a flip chart and you're going to have to use other things, then you're going to need to know that, because you've got a PowerPoint deck. You can't present your PowerPoint deck. What are you going to do? You need to have your visual aids. So maybe you need to prepare some posters or flip chart papers or something ahead of time. So those are things that you need to know about. Maybe the equipment was there when you reserved the room, but guess what? It's broken now. So what facilities are available? We're talking about silly things like restrooms and stuff like that. I'm big on the whole safety thing. That's just part of being growing up at the Space Center, that we always started our meetings with safety messages. And so that was, if we were in unfamiliar places, the safety messages were always about where to go for fire or emergency exits and things like that. And then, of course, what support's available to you. So I was here, I got on prior to the meeting so that we could make sure that as Steve came on, sound check, is everything good? Those types of things. I also understand that some of the people out here are not within the firewall, right? Or are inside a firewall, I should say. And so they can't hook up to the Zoom meeting. So I sent Steve and Sue the actual PowerPoint presentation, a PDF of it, so you could be going along with me. And I'm sorry for you guys. You know what? My bad. I should have told you what slide we're on. So if you're in a virtual space, and that's kind of what we're getting into right now. So if you're in a virtual space, a lot of the same things still apply. Like I said, I know some of you couldn't get into the Zoom meetings because of firewall issues and things like that. So, and Steve and them know who you are. So they sent you probably the deck. The other thing that's important, I talked about the importance of body language and eye contact and the communication, how people communicate, right? But if we're virtual, my body language isn't really going to matter that much, right? I mean, some of you can see me, some of you can't, fine and good. But those of you who can, but all you can see me is from my neck up anyway, so there's not too much body language there. But my voice now becomes really important, really. So I need to convey my enthusiasm, I need to convey my confidence, I need to convey my experience, everything with my voice. So your voice becomes very important. So that's another reason to make sure that all the equipment is working well. If the speakers aren't working well, then things get lost in translation. This morning I was on a meeting, and it was pretty bad, because every couple of words, it was almost like we were on a cell phone. Every few words would kind of drop. So I asked the people who were on the meeting with me, I said, if this is irritating or distracting to you, we can hang up and call back and try and get a better line. So you need to also be aware of that. So if other people are having issues hearing you or seeing what you're presenting or something, you need to make accommodations for them. We also, this part is not normal to us. As human beings, we're wired for success. We want to look on the bright side of things, unless you're Eeyore, right? Unless you're the Eeyore type, you always are looking to the good things. But here we want to know what can go wrong. What can go wrong with our presentation? It might be difficult for you to think this way, to think negatively, but you really, really need to. What could go wrong with your visual aids? Could there be equipment failure? Like I said, you know, maybe when you first checked out the room, everything was fine, but today the overhead projector's broken. Can't help it. What are you going to do? How are you going to fix that? You need to prepare for that just in case. Yes, you prepared by going to the place first, but now there's this last minute change. You need to prepare for that. There might be a power failure. Then you can't present a PowerPoint. What can you do? You might have lights, you might not have lights. Maybe you're going to go outside. Maybe you're going to cancel it. I don't know. What if somebody got sick, somebody who was supposed to be there to support you? What if they got sick at the last minute and now they can't support you? What are you going to do with that person gone? Interruptions. So again, back to my Toastmaster experience, but we used to practice or hold our meetings at a restaurant, and right behind the restaurant was a railroad. Right behind the restaurant. So you might be up there giving a speech. In the middle of the speech, the train comes by. It was actually really good practice for us, because these kinds of things can really happen. Likewise, it was a restaurant. We would have dinner, and the servers were in and out of the room all during your speech. So it helped us to practice, because if you might be presenting at an NMA dinner meeting, and it's possible that those kind of distractions are going to be going on while you're doing your presentation. Maybe the servers aren't actually serving the food, but they might be clearing away the tables and things like that. Dishes will be clanging and stuff. I know we had an NMA meeting once whenever I worked at the Space Center, and restaurant kitchen was right behind the wall of the room we were meeting in. And they were throwing dishes around, throwing pots and pans around. It was so loud that our poor presenter was having a hard time presenting. And, you know, we had to go around to the hotel staff and ask them, could they quiet these people down? But the presenter, he was just going on, just like, you know, it wasn't even happening. But everybody in the audience knew it was happening. So those are all things that you have to prepare for. And then the last one is, of course, our fear, everybody's fear. Part of your fear of public speaking is, what if I lose my place? What if I forget what I was trying to say? You just fake it. You just, hey, if you lose your place, you just pick up someplace else. Try and make it seem natural. Most of the time when you make a mistake, when you're doing a presentation, nobody even knows it. Nobody knows that you made a mistake because they don't know your material unless they've heard it before. So one of the things that I used to do, and this was long time ago, but I would prepare a PowerPoint deck. But we weren't always sure that our equipment in our conference rooms was going to work. So in addition to my PowerPoint deck, I would make view graphs. Everybody remember that, right? The view graphs, the transparencies that you put on the overhead projector and project on the screen. I made view graphs so that if the computer didn't work in the conference room to project my PowerPoint, then I at least had the view graphs. And guess what? What if the view graph machine had broken down? Then I had actual handouts of my presentation that I would give to people, and we would do it that way. Not the best way, but it was a way to do it. And understand that I did this because I had experienced each one of those things. Trust me. If it can go wrong, Murphy's Law, if it can go wrong, it probably will go wrong. And then our third P, present. So now we're actually at the presentation. Now we're actually going to present. So the first thing you have to do is come up with an attention-getting opening. You can sing a song. I've heard people do that. You can ask a question. Actually, today, I thought about asking you a question, and then I realized that it wouldn't be easy for you to answer me or for me to know if you raised your hand. So I wouldn't have that, feedback immediately. So I figured questions wasn't good. So what I did instead, right, was I came up with a new word you probably never heard of before, glossophobia. Maybe, hopefully that got your attention. And then I told you a little joke. And if the glossophobia didn't get your attention, maybe the joke did. So at the end, you guys can tell me, did I get your attention with my opening? Some of the other things that you can do is talk very softly and then get really loud. One time I started a speech with, shh, don't tell anybody what I'm going to say. It's a secret, right? It's a secret. I got your attention now because I'm going to tell you a secret. And then I went on with my speech. Another really effective opening somebody used one time was they had a hammer with them, like a gavel, and they went bam on the podium. That got everybody's attention. Loud. Ah. So make sure that you get their attention. The next part is your voice. When you're practicing, you can record yourself if you have a recording device. Record yourself, and you do. Most everybody has one on their cell phone. Listen to your voice. Are you a monotone? I can't even talk in a monotone. It's just not even possible for me. But you want to make sure that you have a lot of variety in your voice. You want to make sure that you pronounce your words correctly and clearly. Pronunciation is really important. I cannot tell you how distracting it is for me, and I'm sure for any audience, if people don't pronounce their words correctly and enunciate them correctly. That's really important. Pace is another aspect of your voice. Make sure you're not talking too fast, and make sure you're not talking too slow, because either one will put your audience to sleep if you're talking too slow and lose their attention, or if you're talking too fast, they might not be able to keep up with you. Because believe me, we can talk a whole lot faster than we can understand. So the whole point of the attention getting opening is to get people's attention right from the beginning. You want to grab them. You want to bring them in. You need to make eye contact with everybody in the room. Now, how in the world, if you've got a big, huge audience, can you make eye contact with everybody in the room? If you look and make eye contact, excuse me, see, talk about enunciation. If you make eye contact with several different people in the room, you look at them in the eye, you make eye contact with them for at least 10 to 15 seconds, then even if you've got 100 people in the room, but you've only picked out 4 or 5 people to make eye contact with and have that eye contact for 10 to 15 seconds, everybody in the room will feel like you've made eye contact with them. Doesn't matter how many people you have. If you have just a small number of people, then you want to try to make eye contact with everyone. You want to make people feel like you're talking directly to them. Style. Style is coming up on this slide. Your audience is going to mirror your attitude. So you've got their attention from your attention getting opening, but you don't want to lose them now. So you have to have the right attitude for your message. Your attitude is in your voice, is conveyed in your voice and in your body language. If you aren't on, and that's what it is, you're on. I remember when I used to teach a 40-hour course in problem solving and decision making, I would be more tired at the end of the day every day because I had to be on for 8 hours. I had to be excited about what I was talking about. I had to make people think that I was enthusiastic and really wanted them to learn. And of course I did, but still you're on, and it doesn't matter how bad you feel. You're out there. You need to get on and have some energy and do your presentation like, this is the most exciting thing in the world to me. That's part of your style. And it's going to keep your audience's attention. Another way to keep their attention is involve them. So how do you involve the audience? Ask them questions. Make them do an exercise. It depends on how long you have. Make them do an exercise. And this goes back to the communication process, remember? So if people experience something, if they actually do an exercise, then they're going to learn and retain that a whole lot longer than if they just hear you talk. If you are able to ask them questions and they answer you back, that's involving them. Having them, if you have handouts and you want them to do something, even if they're not in a group exercise, but you want them to do something, say, write down your top 3 desires in the world, right? What are the 3 things you want most of anything else? But if you do something like that, you then need to use it. I have been in many presentations, some of them NMA, some of them other places, where they tell you to do something like that, and then when you're done, they go on to something completely different. Well, why did you just have me do this? If you want to put something like that into your presentation that's involving your audience, now you need to do something with that. You need to follow up. Maybe you just say, who wants to share their top 3 desires? Anybody? Because trust me, people think you have me writing something down for a reason, and people will volunteer. That's another thing. So if you ask a question and to involve the audience and nobody answers, people are afraid of silence, including the presenter. So don't be tempted just because nobody answers right away to jump in and provide the answer. You need to wait. Because again, people don't like silence. So somebody will jump in. And if they don't, then you can say, I need a volunteer. And if nobody volunteers, I'm going to pick somebody. Then you're definitely going to get a volunteer. Finally, going back to how people take in information. Make sure your body language, your mannerisms, your gestures convey the message that you're trying to get across. Our body language is 55% of the communication process. What we're saying with our body is what people are going to believe, not the words we're saying with our mouth. Stand up straight, have good posture. Even if you are nervous, channel that nervous energy. Don't be putting your hands in your pockets trying to keep them still, because you're going to have change in your pocket or something like that. And besides that, that's just not a good look when you're presenting, is having your hands in your pocket. But if they are in there, you'll be doing something. Don't be clasping them together like you're scared to death, even if you are. Use your energy. Take up the space that you have to use. Take up all of it. That doesn't mean pace back and forth like a caged animal. That means walk around, make a connection with your audience over on one side, walk to the other side, using your natural gestures. That will help expel some of your nervous energy, is using gestures and walking around and using up the space. But you want to make sure that you're talking to the entire audience, that you look at one side of the audience, you look at the other side of the audience, you look at the ones right in the middle in front of you. Don't stand, if you're physically presenting, don't stand in one spot. Move around and act natural. Make your movements natural. So in summary, here's what we talked about. We talked a little bit about some communication facts, about how people take information in and how long they retain it if it's something that they've just heard. And then we talked about the 3 Ps of effective presentations. Prepare. Make sure that you prepare your material, that your material has a beginning, a body, and an end or a conclusion. Make sure that you practice, practice, practice. And then a few tips on presentation skills, on how to present, using your body language, using your voice, and using your visual aids and things like that. So now, most of all, please have fun whenever you are doing a presentation, because that's really important. If you're not having fun, if you're not enjoying what you're doing, then your audience is going to know that. So now I will open it up to questions. So Steve, do we have any questions?
This is Avis. I have a comment and a question.
Sure.
Actually, I've got 2 comments. Your comment about planning unexpected interruptions.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite example of that is a Toastmasters table topics contest where a fire alarm went off and we had to leave the building.
Yeah.
So we had to use our optional question. Went back in, restarted the contest, and the fire alarm went off again.
Oh, no.
So those of us in Toastmasters for a long time learn to adjust, don't we?
That's right. Yes, we do.
Anyway, my comment about your presentation, I live and die by the notes function in PowerPoint. It's absolutely invaluable to me.
Right.
My question is analyzing the audience. You talked about being familiar with your audience. Do you have any helpful hints for becoming at least remotely familiar with an audience that you've never presented before? the reason I ask is over the years, I've had a couple of instances where I talked to the sponsor of the program and got some information and prepared a presentation based on what they said. Well, very quickly into my presentation, I noticed there was more than a usual amount of restlessness in the audience. So I backed off my presentation and, as you said, started asking questions of the audience. And in those two cases, I learned that the skill level of the audience was not the skill level that the sponsor had led me to believe. And afterwards, I looked at how they advertised it, and they did not advertise it the way we had discussed. So one thing I do urge people to do, if someone else is doing the advertising for you, be sure that it matches what you expected to prepare.
Exactly. Yes, that's very good. A very good point. So Steve, for instance, of course I know my NMA audience, right? But still, Steve sent the advertisement to me, the e-blast. He sent it to me first and said, is this okay? Is this what you're gonna talk about? And I said, yeah, that's perfectly fine. So I agree. Yes, you need to be sure that the advertising is that you're aware of how they're advertising your presentation. The other thing, you did the perfect thing by talking to the organizer of the event. They should know who's going to be there. But if they don't, then again, preparation is going to be the most important piece, because just as you did, you're in your audience, you see your audience is restless, so you've got to be able to read your audience. That's very important. If they're getting restless, then you need to stop, find out what's going on, get their level, and then adapt. Adaptability. So that's, again, one of those things that could go wrong. What if somebody gave you the wrong information about your audience? So if you don't know, you have to prepare as if they don't know anything. And then maybe the first thing you can do is gauge their level of expertise. How many of you have experience in, creating an effective presentation? Something like that. Start your speech that way. Start your presentation by finding out how much they know, and then adapt.
The interesting thing is, in one of the cases, I convinced the sponsor, I went through at that skill level, but I convinced the sponsor to let me come back and advertise it differently and actually give the presentation to an audience with the skill level for which the presentation was intended.
Very good. Okay. Any other questions?
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Avis. Thanks, Melinda. Who else out there has a question? I don't have anything in the chat room. So if you have a question or a comment for Melinda, we'll ask you to step to the mic and pass it along. Anyone? It's awfully quiet out there.
Sure is. You can hear the crickets.
Here's a question from Greenville.
Okay, great.
You talked about being prepared for all those things that could happen. What's the balance between preparing for those things but actually them causing needless worry and concern that actually impedes your ability to be delivering a good performance?
Well, actually, I find that preparing for them, anticipating what could go wrong and preparing for it actually eases that anxiety. Because then if it goes wrong, I know I have a solution right off the bat. I'm ready for it. So it doesn't make you more anxious. I think it helps you to become less anxious about it.
Yeah, and this is Avis again. That's something that comes with experience. The more presentations you give, the better you are at practicing for the unknowns, and that makes you more confident.
Right.
All right. Who else? While others are coming to the microphone, I wrote down a couple of things, Melinda, during your presentation. You talked about the importance of practice in helping people overcome things that are awkward. I learned the hard way, like most of us, practicing a presentation means doing it out loud.
Exactly.
It's really easy to sit there in a comfortable chair and go over your notes, look at your slides, and you've put it together so you know what's there. So I think you can lull yourself into a false sense of preparedness.
Right.
And what I have learned is if I hoist my big one out of the chair and I stand up and I talk it through out loud, even though I've written it, I find many occasions where, well, that just sounds awful, or that's really awkward.
Yep.
Your own words and your own voice coming back in your own ear are shockingly not as good as they should be sometimes.
Exactly. And sometimes, too, it's fine and good to write it this way, and maybe it's proper to write it that way, but it just doesn't sound natural saying it that way. It just doesn't. And I mean, and above all else, we want to feel natural or seem natural when we're giving a presentation.
Absolutely. Steve, do you practice in front of a mirror?
Oh, no.
I do sometimes because I want to be sure that my body language is natural and not fake. Because audience picks up fake like nobody.
Well, if you had my body, you would not be practicing in front of a mirror. That's just
Steve. I had your body for a long time.
We're not go there.
Let's not go there. Let's not go there.
No. I've lost 100 pounds, so he's jealous.
Okay. Thank you, Avis. All right. Anybody else?
So let me just say one more thing. I mean, while the people are coming up with questions. Is and this is true even if you have something to read. So when I was the chairman of the board and I had to stand up in front of all of you guys with Steve or in the podium, and everything was scripted for us because Sue doesn't let us go up there and ad lib too much, right? We have to read the script because it's important that we stay on time. But you know what? The script's there, but I would read the script and I would rewrite the script and I would read it out loud because it really needed to sound like it was coming from me and not like I was reading a script. So even if somebody else gives you something to read, you still have to practice. You still have to look at it. You have to make sure that it sounds natural coming from you, even if you're reading it.
Absolutely.
Melinda, I learned that one even before I was NMA president. A few years ago, my predecessor, his mother took sick, and he had to go to Lafayette, Indiana, and I had to make a major presentation in his place that he had put together. And even though I knew the subject matter, it was one of the worst moments of my life because I got up there, they were his words and not mine, and I was ready to pull my hair out. And I remember Sue made the comment, she goes, "I've never seen you that nervous." I said, "I've never felt so unprepared." Even though I knew the topic,
Yeah.
His thought process and his flow was completely different from how I would have done it. Not wrong, just different.
Just different, right. All right, any other questions? Have we lost everybody?
No, I'm looking. They're still logged on, which is a good thing.
Okay. I was just hearing all the crickets, so I thought maybe they were gone.
We'll give them one last chance. We've only lost one person so far, and it's about 1 o'clock. We're coming up upon
the time, right? We got about 5 minutes.
Yeah. Well, actually, in chat, there's a message from
there is.
Pooch.
All right, here it goes.
Why don't we talk about that, Steve?
I got it. This is from Melbourne. 55% is visual. How should we dress, men and women?
I think that's a good question.
Appropriate for your topic and appropriate for your audience. This is another reason to know your audience. So if I were presenting to an NMA audience, I'm going to dress professionally. I'm going to wear a business suit or at least wear professional attire as a male or a female. If I'm presenting to my Toastmasters group, then I'm going to be a little less formal, if you will, or a little not less professional, but I might be more, because I know my Toastmasters group, I might be willing to wear jeans. I'm not going to go there in shorts or whatever, but I mean, hey, I work from home. you hardly ever see me in something like this whenever I'm working from home. I usually have on my jeans and my sweats and stuff like that. But today I decided I need to dress professional. Besides that, I do have a Toastmasters meeting tonight. So
you clean up well. Melinda, I've got a couple more questions, also from Florida. Number one.
In Florida, it's okay to wear your flip-flops.
No, I'm going to have to laugh when I read this one. Any suggestions for first-timer anxiety, followed by, does it help to drink before your speech?
Maybe one drink, but that's all. First-timer anxiety. Yeah, the help for first-timer anxiety is practice, practice, practice. Honestly, that is the key. Prepare and practice, and try to go to a Toastmaster meeting or somewhere else where you can talk to people in front of people and practice in front of people, because that's what's going to help you. I'm not going to say, imagine them all naked, because that would probably make me more nervous. So that would be my advice, is just practice, 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 and channel that energy. It's good to be nervous. I'm nervous before every presentation I give. I was nervous today.
Yeah.
You just have to use that energy properly. Channel it.
Yeah.
Use good gestures, move around, and that will help. And once you do that, you might be nervous in the beginning, but once you do that, then you're going to feel less nervous.
And I'll give another tip for first-timers, something that helps me. Chances are you have written a speech. With any luck, maybe you've just done bullet points, which helps keep you from reading a speech. But I think, at least at first, most people tend to write out a speech. Okay, so be it. Then what you got to watch out for is then standing there and reading it, which you don't want to do. So how do you avoid that as a first-timer? What works for me, and I truly still do it. I did it when we were in Reno, especially if I've got some kind of script, something I've got to follow. I will take highlighters and pens, and I will group together certain words so that I can look down and I visually capture the phrase or the words, which then allows me to look up and talk from my notes rather than speak from them. Plus, it also kind of it helps you find your place when you look back down. So, everybody has their own little way, but for me, color coding things and underlining things and grouping them together helps you keep the thought. Otherwise, you're reading it and you're not sure what the next word is.
Yeah, and that's a point, hey, you guys now know I slipped up, and that was something that I meant to mention, is that don't put your presentation on your PowerPoint. Put reminders, put bullet points. Don't put the whole presentation up there and then read it to them, because that's insulting to your audience. They can read. So sometimes, and I have some material whenever I'm teaching green belt or yellow belt classes or something like that, well, you know what, they need to have this information. I don't want them to have to take notes, so I put it all on the slide, but I don't read it. I summarize the slide.
Right.
And I start off by, I'm not going to insult you by reading this. You can read yourself, but here's the point of this slide.
Okay. We are out of time. Melinda, you've done a wonderful job. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I know Melinda's available if anybody wants to drop her an email, ask some other questions, or you can come back and do this again at 3 o'clock. The rest of it. So thank you, and allow me, on behalf of Robin, Sue, Kim, and Melinda, wish all of you a very safe and wonderful Thanksgiving with friends and family. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.